Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about one of the biggest scams in the industry right now, and that is this whole plant-based protein thing. And here's the point. The reason it's a scam is that plant-based protein is kind of inferior. Not just kind of, it is very inferior to animal source proteins in terms of bioavailability to us as humans, and accordingly, it doesn't have the same benefits on a gram for gram basis. Now, I'm not talking about for vegans per se, even though you guys know my stance on veganism, because vegans comprise such a tiny amount of the market, and they can already kind of get their own specialized proteins. Most of the big companies make it already that they can get specifically for that. But what we see is labeling on stuff. And it's kind of for people who are ill-informed. Essentially, when you see plant-based protein written on anything, doesn't matter whether it's some of these foods, these fake meats that are coming out, protein powders, anything else, the idea is the same. They're marketing to people who kind of sort of want to be healthy, but they don't bother to do any research on it. They just kind of say, oh, well, must be plant-based, must be healthier, I'm going to do that instead. And they still probably have pretty bad diets. They probably don't really train. If they do train, it's probably not remotely close to what they need to do to reach the goals that they have, whether it's health, fitness, a certain look, whatever it is they're trying to do. So it's for the general public who isn't going to bother to do any reading or put any real effort in. But it works and it sells because that's an enormous market. There's millions and millions of those people out there. And so what it is just like, oh, this is plant-based protein. It's healthy. When oftentimes nothing could be further from the truth. And what do I mean by that? Well, in the worst case, it's used to sell fake meats. And if you look at the ingredient list on a lot of these fake meats that are being sold, and even some of the fast food places and stuff have picked them up, they are arguably considerably worse than meat in terms of what they do for health, what the ingredients are, sometimes even the macronutrient breakdown. They're just garbage in comparison. And I am not telling people that they need to be eating really fatty cuts of meat. I'm a proponent of lean meat, lean dairy, lean animal proteins. Right? Everyone knows this. I'm not telling you to be eating, 150 grams of fat every day. In fact, I almost never go over 40 or 50 grams, if that, a day myself. And I eat large amounts of animal products, but they're all lean. But conversely, many of these fake meats are just as bad, if not worse, on the fat. They're a terrible protein source, so it's actually an inferior protein, just as much fat, more processing, more preservatives, all sorts of stuff put in there. So if you were to actually take them on a gram for gram basis and compare them to even remotely lean animal proteins, from a health perspective, from a nutrition perspective, they're completely inferior. And we could almost argue some of them are toxic garbage. And yet it's then being marketed to the same crowd as, oh, it's healthier because it's not animals. Well, lean animal proteins have never been a source of concern. And I know I'm going to get slammed by certain people, certain dogmatic dietary cults, and let's call them what they are. If you're going to slam me on this, you are one of these cults. Yeah, we could make the argument that really fatty cuts of meat are not good for you, right? Large amounts of saturated fat from meat specifically, or refined saturated fats. We're not talking about in whole milk. Let's talk about butter, for example, one of the worst garbage junk foods you could possibly eat. And the data supports that. When you start looking at the blood work of people when butter is used, it supports that. And that includes people's organic grass-fed butter. It's just as bad. Shut up. It is. If you think that's a health food, I'm sorry, you are ill-informed. And don't say, well, this quack doctor who is a quack says otherwise. Well, no one cares. He's a quack. And he's fringe. Nobody cares. You shouldn't care either. So, The issue we run into is that, again, a lot of it's pretty bad. But then if we come down to just plant-based protein in general, on a gram for gram basis or a dollar for dollar basis, it is going to be worse than animal source proteins. And again, most people who don't eat meat are still vegetarians or not full vegans. They can use dairy. Dairy proteins are considered to be the best. They are generally very, very high quality with extremely good bioavailability. You know, again, barring things like the creatine and stuff in there, we could argue that dairy is superior to meat for the most part. Just slightly so, you know, if we're talking about full nutritional benefits, protein quality, just by a small, small margin. I'm a big dairy fan. All right, well, people who are just vegetarians can still do dairy. Most protein powders are dairy based. So it shouldn't even be a selling point for them. And when you look at it though, they're completely inferior. They have a lower bioavailability. And before people chime in and say, are you saying they're incomplete proteins? Because that's not true. Well, no, I didn't say that. You said that. And it's kind of funny because you'll see the counter argument some plant-based people make that, well, that's a lie. They aren't incomplete proteins. They are complete proteins usually. So these people don't know what they're talking about. And if that's the line that a person's using, you're right. Most plant proteins are complete proteins. That whole idea that they aren't was never based upon the data. That was never based upon the data. The argument might be that the ratios aren't ideal, but if you're eating multiple protein sources, who cares? It's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the ability to absorb and use it. You do not absorb all of the protein from plant sources. So most plant-based protein sources, something between 30 and 50% of the protein you consume never gets fully digested and absorbed and into your bloodstream. So they're not equal. In other words, 20 grams of plant protein is not equal to 20 grams of animal protein in terms of the ability to actually get those grams. So it's already inferior from a bioavailability. All right, that's not a good thing. It's not a good thing. It's not desirable. It's not what we want. That means that you could take something like 20 grams of whey or casein, you're going to get all 20 grams of it. You take 20 grams of a plant protein, you're going to get somewhere between 10 to 14 grams of it. And that's all you're going to get. You're only going to get about a half to 2/3 of it. And in the worst case, half, which means you have to double your protein intake if you're doing plant-based proteins. Well, that's not cost effective. It's not desirable. It's not what most of us want to be doing. So ultimately, and they oftentimes charge you more for it. So ultimately, that means it is just a scam. It is marketing hype and nothing more. And that's really and truly all it is. And it's for ignorant people. It's being marketed to ignorant people. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys next time.